All right, since everyone's here nice and bright and early, we want to get started and talk a little bit. Welcome everybody to RakutenTechConf2014. We have a really awesome lineup this year, I think. I'm really excited. We have lots of really great people. We have people come from all over the world to come here. Just talking to Robbie, he's flew in last night, he's enjoying the local scene, and now he's ready here to present to you guys. And both of us actually live in San Francisco, so I work for Rakuten, but in the San Francisco office. And come here a lot, and I work for the team which does a lot of mobile technology. One of the really cool things in San Francisco actually is all this mobile technology that's coming out. AB testing, monitoring. The world is building up mobile technology and building up kind of stuff that's been in the web world for a long time is now coming over. So AB testing is very important for Rakuten and very important for many companies. So technology is pretty cool. So anyway, so you don't want to hear from me. I'm going to hand it over to Robbie and go from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, everybody, for being here, giving me the opportunity to speak here. I'm very excited to be out here today to be giving out this talk. I'm also very excited to be talking about A/B testing, which, as it happens, is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I wanted to start out today, before diving into deep content, with a quick story that some of you may have heard of. So going back in time, about 4th century BC, the great Greek philosopher Aristotle, amongst many other things, investigated the concept of gravity. At the time, he came out to the conclusion that bodies would fall with a speed that was proportional to their weight. So in other words, he thought that a stone that was kind of twice the size of another stone would fall twice as fast. This, at the time, just seemed to be a very plausible conclusion, and it actually stuck around for around 2,000 years. So before anybody came out to have a different idea, we're going to have to wait about 2,000 years later when Italian scientist Galileo Galilei came out with an entirely different theory. And he actually postulated that the gravitational constant would be indifferent of the weight of an object. In other words, two stones of different weights would actually be falling down at the same speed. If we look at these two paradigms today, we would feel like we know immediately what the answer is. But if you have to kind of bring yourself back to that time and that place, that was absolutely not obvious. The Aristotle theory was common knowledge, and if you think of yourself as dropping down a feather in a stone, you'll definitely see the stone fall first. So you definitely would feel like this is intuitive. Second problem, there was absolutely no way to accurately measure the speed of a falling object, given the technology of the time. So Galileo made a very intuitive and very smart choice. He actually went up to the top of the tallest building he had around, which happened to be the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and he actually dropped a large stone and a small one at the same time to see whether or not they would fall down at the same time. Forget about speed, forget about measurement, let's just put them to the test. Now, you probably can understand, you probably can guess which version of the two actually won. The rest is history. But the whole concept is extremely important. Some people claim that Galileo, by doing this, invented the world's first controlled experiment. So what are controlled experiments? Really, the idea is to put it to the test to find out what works better. This example, though it's, of course, historical, is particularly relevant still today. We find ourselves many times in situations where we are either trying to challenge the status quo, or we are coming up with another idea. And we have, number one, really no way before doing it to find out whether this idea is going to have a positive effect. And number two, just by doing it without testing it, we will be able to go into the future, come back, and never know whether it worked or not. Because the future has a lot of different things that we cannot measure the consequences of what we did. So that's what really A/B testing is about. A/B testing is about taking the experimental method that's been around in science for around 400 or 500 years and applying it towards solving business problems. When there's an uncertainty, A/B testing allows you to use what we call randomized controlled experiments to improve an outcome of interest. Very widely applicable, and right now, it's really become what you could call the golden standard for customer-facing innovation. And again, it's because the situations keep changing and the applications keeps changing, but the principle of being able to try out what works is really a fantastic driver of innovation. So I said, I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to be talking about A/B testing. As it happens, I now work with a mobile A/B testing company, but I've spent my entire career working in A/B testing and consulting consumer-facing companies in A/B testing, and retail, restaurants, hotels, banks, insurance, pharmaceutical, web, mobile, really all around the place. I'm excited about it. And what I want to do before getting into the details is to kind of give you some stories of how in times of innovation, A/B testing has helped companies and has helped disciplines really kind of jump forward and stand head and shoulders above the competition by really guaranteeing a kind of rate of innovation. So let's just kind of go back in history. I picked out a few examples, there are many. 1948, the randomized control trial, one of the most important inventions of modern medicine is the idea that before giving a drug to patients, the very last test we have to do is take a bunch of people who would need that drug, divide them at random, and give half the people the drug and half the people placebo, and measuring whether the drug actually works. This method, invented in 1948, is so popular that right now, no country with an established medical system would ever allow people to take a drug without passing this test first. Going forward and moving on to a different industry, 1994, banking. United States, this bank, which not all of you may be familiar with, called Capital One, launches out in the US market and starts offering credit cards. Credit cards are a very saturated market, incredibly competitive, where if you've ever lived in the US, you literally get dozens of letters every week asking you to open a credit card. Capital One wins the battle and immediately kind of shoots up to become a dominant player in the credit card industry. How do they do it? Through a world-class process of innovation through A/B testing. Every single part of Capital One's strategy, from who do they mail, how often they mail, what interest rate they give, what credit cap they give, what does the letter look like, does it have a fake little plastic thing that implies that there's a credit card inside to get your attention and get you to open the letter, which demographic do they target? Every single thing is the result of a carefully controlled A/B test, which informed their strategy, allowed them to go from nothing in 1994 to a leader right now. And as of their latest public account, they run about 24,000 tests a year only on this practice. So really the principal fuel of innovation. If we keep going, let's get into some territory that we're familiar with. 2001, Google. Engineers at Google invent the term A/B testing and start for the first time applying the concept of experimentation towards building a website. Very natural, highly innovative company, a website that targets a very large number of users, and Google starts experimenting literally everything. From I'm feeling lucky, that's been changing, to the logo, to the position of the search screen, to how many advertisements you will find. Every single thing has been optimized to get maximum response. And I've actually had the pleasure a few years ago to even collaborate with Google on some more advanced issues, such as when people click on an advertisement online, will they then go to a store and actually buy the item? Every single thing can be put to an A/B test to be approved. Let's continue to a field that you might not necessarily associate with A/B testing, restaurants, and in particular limited time offers. So some of you may be familiar with Subway, the restaurant chain. 2004, Subway launched a campaign called the $5 footlong. Anybody who was a student in the United States at that time, such as myself, will remember it as an epic campaign that literally drove thousands of students towards these restaurants. One of the most successful limited time offer marketing campaign probably in the history of US restaurants. It was entirely the result of carefully controlled experiments. My former company was actually involved in this process. You kind of look at this offer and think that some genius made it up. There's of course part of intuition, but every single part of this campaign, right? The $5 price set, the types of items that are on, the price for each item. Some items are not $5. How are they organized? What marketing is associated to it? The fact that it's only in September, only for September, it's a limited time offer. Every single thing was carefully controlled through A/B testing to get to the maximum output, right? And if we keep going again, kind of getting a little bit more towards our topic right now, kind of fast forward again to 2013. Facebook got to the mobile market late. They had to innovate fast, and one of the ways they did it is they were one of the first companies to build a truly world-class A/B testing system within their mobile apps. Some of you who are interested in UI and UX within the context of mobile apps will know about the famous or infamous Hamburger Menu right up here. So a way to kind of hide in all the options from the side. Well, the Hamburger Menu invented by Facebook was removed by Facebook in 2013 as a result of an A/B test. Controlled experiment, the two versions are right here, and as you can see, the Hamburger Menu is now gradually disappearing from a lot of other apps. So this is what A/B testing is about. This is how applicable it is, and today I want to be focusing on the context of mobile apps. There's a lot to say about how to use A/B testing in mobile apps and how to get some benefits out of it. But what I really want to focus on today is three topics that I think are going to be of particular interest. The first one is what to test in mobile. And the short answer to it is everything, but the long answer is there are some things that we feel are likely to give major benefit with minimal effort, and I want to go over them. The second is how to use A/B testing to make the right decision. So not only run the experiment, but bring it down to the conclusion. Just running it is not the whole story. And three, I want to get into some slightly more technical details about the A/B testing architecture. Not only what to test and what to measure, but actually how to do it within the context of a mobile app. So let's start out with what to test in mobile. Again, the list is very long, but I really want to give in two specific ideas and want to touch on them with some case studies that we've got from actual apps that have tried them out. So two ideas I'm going to be presenting today, literally low effort and high outcome, are what we call call to action and engagement UI, two topics that are really fantastic candidates for A/B testing. So let's start out with call to action. What is a call to action? How do we define a call to action? It is a message. It is a written message within a mobile application whose purpose it is to convince a user to take an action of particular importance. The action typically involves either a transaction of money or some sort of permission, with notification, location, download the extra app, etc., etc. These are fantastic topics for A/B testing because, as we will see, they're simple to test and they tend to produce some really outstanding results, positive or negative. That's the magic of A/B testing, but always some pretty big signals. Let's get to a small kind of real-life example. One of our customers produces this app, amongst others, called Chord Shaker. It's an app that teaches you how to play guitar. It's a freemium app, so after a certain amount of use, it will actually encourage you to unlock a paid version of the app for what happens to be a $7.99 fee for the US market. This was the original call to action. Unlock to access 150 plus hit songs, upgrade now to $7.99. The idea was, can we just be able to change the revenue of our app simply by changing what we tell users when we're trying to convince them to upgrade? So what they did is they actually experimented with two different variants. One is, appealing to the rock and roll spirit of the users, let's rock. And the second one is just telling people, reminding them to unlock for life. So the fact is not a recurring subscription. These were ideas, absolutely no idea what would work better. So I just want to do a quick poll out here. And again, you cannot get the answer wrong, because if you know the answer before you test it, then you don't need A/B testing. So feel free to kind of use your instinct. Who here would think that this variant would perform better than the original? Okay. So who thinks that this variant would perform better than the original? Okay, great. Well, so let's take a look at the answer. Now, what's surprising about this answer, what was surprising kind of to me as the tester, if you will, about this answer, is not so much the answer in itself. It's not so much the fact that this particular version is performing worse than this other version, but it's the magnitude of the impact. We've spent so much time and effort building an app and trying to get engagement from the users and go on customer acquisition and getting them to like it, that we can actually, the thought that we can actually change by 40% by plus 30%. So we can literally change the future of this app revenue-wise by changing a line of text is really mind-blowing. So really, one topic to start and one topic that's of very high interest is the call to action. Not necessarily applicable to every app. Let's go to a different example. So the next example that I want to present out today is engagement UI. So what does engagement UI mean? So engagement UI, the way we define it is the user interface for a part of the app that does not necessarily imply an important one-off action, but is used over and over and over by the user, right? So not the most important part, not a buy now, but something that the user uses over and over. Think of the Hamburger Menu on Facebook, right? It's not the settings menu that you see every once in a while that you need to access only once. It's the part of the UI that you keep engaging with. So in this case, we've got another case study that I found to be particularly interesting. This is another customer of ours, Pactor. It is a dating app on iOS and Android that is pretty popular, especially on Southeast Asia. Their model implies, kind of flipping very quickly through photos of a lot of people, and quickly defining through these icons here whether you like the profile or not. And the icons, as you can see, are a thumbs down and a thumbs up. So those of you who are familiar with United States apps will probably associate this app to Tinder, which is one of the close competitors. So Tinder is a similar app in the United States that had really skyrocketing success, and actually is using these two icons to indicate dislike and like of a profile. So the people at Pactor had thought that given the successful competitor and given their similar kind of target and app, it would actually make sense to change the UI. Originally, they thought this would not be a big deal. They thought it wouldn't make a big difference, and really it could be something that would just kind of naturally drive engagement and be part of the design. Ultimately, however, they decided to test it. So again, the original with these icons and the kind of Tinder style app, or the new app, if you will, with this set of icons here. Again, just a quick poll. Who thinks that this set of icons would perform better than the original? Okay. Who thinks it would perform worse? And who thinks it would not make any difference? No measurable difference. Okay. Okay, we got a bit of a poll. Well, here's your answer. 6% fewer profiles like for the new icons. You can come up with your own theory as to why that actually happened. You can actually slice and dice the data. We actually saw that on a country-by-country basis, the impact is quite different. So it might have had to do with the geographic locations, the nature of their users and their preferences.
Are you taking questions now?
Sorry?
Are you taking questions now? Or?
You can. I was thinking of the end, but I'm very happy to answer it now. Go ahead.
Is it second by gender?
No. At the time, we did not have that information. Very, very insightful kind of question, though. I would have liked to do that if we had the information at the time. A 6% drop in profiles like which, however, when you do the math, comes down to 11% loss in revenue and 26% loss in growth. Why? Because the engagement, this is what the users spend all their time doing. The fewer profiles they tap, the fewer people they get in their list, the fewer messages they send, the more the app goes down. Again, a very small change, changing two icons in a part, that has an effect that is extremely large. And also, I think the other lesson that we learned personally from this app is the fact that A/B testing is there for a reason, and is that not everything works across every app. Your app is different, your mechanics are different, your users are different, the geographies you work on are different. So you should always be careful to take what works and apply it blindly rather than just putting it out to an experiment. Excuse me. So again, talked about a few experiments that work out in areas, but really, if you kind of extend it out to the entire domain of A/B testing in apps, literally almost every part of the app is a candidate for A/B testing. And what we've seen successfully tested is menus and features. Which feature should you place? Where? Do certain features increase engagement or decrease it? The layout of a page, just like pages are also engagement items. So just like the icons that you put can make a huge difference, changing the order of items, especially in parts of the app that have high engagement, can really make a huge difference. Message and copy in general, we talked about. Login screens are huge, and we're going to be touching on them soon. Flows of the app, typical example for e-commerce will be, am I going to have a multi-step checkout process, an accordion checkout process? Those things almost always make a difference. You're not going to know until you try it, but they almost always make a difference. And then finally, of course, upgrade, purchase, anything that's directly tied to revenue is always a great candidate for testing. Especially, let me add, and this is kind of a bit of an experience that I've seen coming through, especially in mobile, because purchases and microtransactions in mobile, given the nature of the medium, tend to be extremely instinctive. And when things are instinctive, relatively small changes in the way you're presenting them can make a huge impact in the final reaction of the user. So that's something that I think is even stronger in mobile versus not only web, but versus other channels that really kind of go into A/B test along. So the second thing that I wanted to talk about today is making the right decision. So one thing that really kind of strikes me sometimes is it's very easy to think that the end of the test happens when you run it. Whereas very often companies and people using A/B testing tend to forget that a lot of the subtlety not only lies in picking the right topics and running the right test, but in really figuring out what data you need to look at and how you need to look at it to make the right decision. So I want to give you an example, but also I want to really kind of start out with a rule of thumb that I like to use when thinking about the 3 things that we've got to keep in mind every single time we're assessing the results of an experiment. And these things are reactions, funnels, and long-term metrics. These are always 3 things to keep in mind, and they're probably best explained through an example. So again, let's pick another app here. This is an e-commerce app. The idea behind it is, the user comes in. This is the first screen they see, and of course, it's a pretty typical setup. Sign in. You can sign in if you already have an account. You can sign up, or you can just skip and go directly to the items. Very common way to start, right? Some apps tend to test hiding the skip option, so kind of making it a little bit harder to see. But these guys really thought, let's just try getting rid of it. Our customer acquisition cost is so high. We do a really good job keeping our customers and keeping them flowing. We really want a way to keep track of our customers and to get them to log in, right? So in this case, I don't really want to emphasize so much the results of the experiment, especially because, again, they're all over the place. They change from case to case. But what are the things you want to measure as a result of this experiment? If you set it up, which sets of behaviors do you really want to take a look at, either as the person who sets it up or as a decision maker, before you decide whether this is a successful experiment? Well, the first is reaction metric. So the action you're taking is to eliminate the skip option. The reaction that you want to get out of this is you want to get more users to sign up. You want to get fewer users to skip. You don't want to get a lot of users who just drop out and close the app. And probably the sign-in rate at the beginning is going to be roughly the same. That's your hypothesis, and this is what you're going to measure, right? In addition, however, the next thing you want to think about is funnels. So the objective of your app, in these cases, e-commerce, is not to get a lot of people to log in. The objective and the KPI of everything within e-commerce is to maximize revenues. So the thing that you absolutely have to think about is tracking the user's reaction all the way down the bottom of the funnel, right? Not only do they sign up, but do they also look at the items? Do they also add them to the cart? Do they check out? And finally, do they make the purchase? Because the concept of bringing a customer down the sign-in funnel versus bringing them down and skipping the sign-in, right, is very important. Maybe people want to come into the app, add the item, then they do something else. Then you send them an email, and then they come back in. So having them log in will actually slightly increase their login rate, but by the time you check out, things improve a lot more. So this is definitely something that you want to measure. Okay? And then the third set of metrics that you always want to keep in mind is what we call long-term metrics. These I just want to be very careful in describing them. These are metrics that are sometimes tricky to measure, especially in apps that are considered to be very transactional. You're booking a flight and then you never go there again. But especially in apps that tend to be used over and over again when there's customer loyalty, where there's return. And especially in experiments where you might be upsetting your customer, or you might make your customer happier. You don't only want to measure what they do now, but you also want to measure what they will do in the future. These sets of metrics are typically called engagement and retention metrics. And they're things like, how much time do users spend in the app? What is the session length? How many pages do they see? How often do they return? And of course, retention. What percentage of my customer comes back within a day, within a week, or within a month, depending on the life cycle of your app is. So if you're in the dating apps, you might want to take a look at the one-day retention, and so on and so forth. Okay? So these are the 3 sets of kind of metrics that you always want to keep track of, and you always want to keep in mind. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the architecture of A/B testing. So, okay, well, this is great. We definitely want to do it. We know why it matters. We know what to test. We know what to measure. But how are we going to do it? How are we going to build that capability? There's a lot of different ways to do it, but first of all, let me tell you why mobile A/B testing is just coming to the game right now. Whereas for web, we've really been thinking about it for a much longer time. The main difference between web and mobile A/B testing, and we're talking about native apps, right? We're not talking about web apps, we're talking about native apps, is that the architecture is entirely different. Web here is fundamentally a constant interaction between a user and a server. So the idea of implementing an A/B test on a website simply implies creating 2 copies of a web page and figuring out a way to send some of your users on one page and some of your users on the other page. Of course, there are subtleties to it, but from an architectural standpoint, it's something relatively easy to do. When you get, on the other hand, into mobile apps, you get into an entirely different world, because the apps are on the device, on the physical device. They're compiled APK, and especially they have to pass, in iOS's case especially, through a pretty complicated and lengthy review process. So what you have to do is you have to think of your A/B testing when you actually code the app, and once you push it out to the store, it's gone. So there's 2 added complexities. The first one is the architecture, and the second is the fact that your reactivity within mobile apps, unless you think about it very carefully, is a lot lower. Because if any of you have built mobile apps, you know what it's like to panic and know that you've actually kind of sent out an app to the App Store that's not ideal. It's not quite like a website. It's a much more complicated process. So similarly in A/B testing, you want to think about it pretty carefully. So again, a lot of subtleties about it, but really the way I would put it is there's 3 different architectures that you can take in order to implement an A/B testing platform. And these are in-house, or this is you use third parties, and it doesn't really matter. The architecture is the same. And I want to present them to you in order of complexity, with each architecture being slightly more complex, but also more powerful in terms of what it allows you to do. So the first architecture is what we call programmatic A/B testing. So a programmatic A/B test, the way we define it, means creating 2 different options or multiple different options for any part of your app in the moment you build the app. So for example, I have this new feature. It is a QR scanner. Does it really work, or is it going to be distracting people, right? Well, let me build 2 versions of this app, one with the QR and one without the QR. Let me put an if statement between them that's basically controlled by a server, and let me build a little bit of logic where it randomly assigns the variables to different users, right? Then what I do is I basically, in the case of port shader, what we want, right? I'm going to have one version that says upgrade now, and the other one says unlock for life. Then I'm going to submit the app, I'm going to wait for it to be reviewed, I'm going to send it to the users, and I'm going to be turning on the variant. I can measure if it works, right? And if it works, that's fantastic, right? If I've hit the jackpot, that's fantastic. If I haven't hit the jackpot, however, if it doesn't work, what happens? I'm going to have to wait another 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks, depending to what my release schedule is, before I have the chance to try another idea, right? And let's keep in mind that, especially when it comes to call to action, it's true that you see a lot of ups and downs, but it's not like every idea improves it, right? You need to take a few shots at it before you find the one that's going to give you the high return. So the disadvantage of this is that you have to come up with all your ideas up front, and if your ideas don't work and you have to come up with the next batch, well, here you go. You've got to deploy the app again, right? But again, it's a it's very simple style of architecture. If you want to kind of increase the sophistication a little bit and increase the power a little bit, what you have is a dynamic variables architecture. This is a variation of the first architecture. What is this? Well, basically, what we're saying is we have a call to action. This call to action is upgrade now. Let's not build it as a call to action. Let's declare it as a variable, right? This variable is upgrade now by default, but can be overwritten by a server that runs our A/B test. The disadvantage of this approach is that it's slightly more complicated. The advantage of it, however, is that we only have to push this variable to the App Store once. And if the new variant does not work from the server, we can give it a new value and try out a new idea, right? But again, it's slightly more complex, it's slightly more powerful because it allows us to try different ideas at a much faster pace and without having to redeploy at all times. What is a disadvantage of this approach? Well, the disadvantage of this approach is that we have to come up with the places of the app that we want to change ahead of time, right? Because if the call to action is good, but then maybe the caller can make a difference or the position can make a difference, well, we're going to have to declare another variable. The second disadvantage is that programmers and developers, after a certain point, don't really want to have their entire app being one gigantic mess of variables, hundreds of variables that are going out to a server. At some point in time, we'll grow out of complexity, right? But again, a more powerful interface. The third architecture is something that we call real-time testing. This is something that's a bit of a wink in my company and what we do, but it is a technology that's out there that's right now kind of exclusively provided by third-party providers, but will be built possibly eventually in-house. And it's the idea of building an infrastructure that allows you to change in real time without having to redeploy the app every element of your UI and reposition it. So basically the whole idea is, can we build an architecture, without going too much into the detail of it, that allows me as a product manager, as the A/B tester, to change every element of the app in real time. And this of course is more complex to build, but it gives you the extra advantage of having full flexibility in terms of, number one, what you want to experiment with, and number two, how fast you can iterate through different ideas before you reach a conclusion. Make sense? So this really brings it together. I want to keep it up brief, and what I wanted to touch on is what the test, so ideas to test. The second is, so keep in mind, ideas to test, call to action, engagement UI, and really it's a good idea to keep it simple at the beginning and keep it to places where the user is making a critical choice, because that's the place where a small change will make a big difference. You're not going to know if it's positive or negative until you try it out, right? Second is making the right decision. Never stop at the surface level of an experiment. It's very easy to run an experiment, interpret the evidence in the wrong way, and literally kind of waste all this effort to finally make the wrong choice. So always think about funnels, always think about long-term, don't just think about reactions. And then finally, think very carefully if you want to either kind of pick up an architecture, build it out in-house, think carefully about what your architecture is going to be, and try to strike the right balance between the complexity of the architecture and the flexibility that it will give you in the app. So that pretty much sums up my talk. And I wanted to open up for questions. Yes?
Maybe you could give us some insights on any risks in A/B testing a little more. What situations, like in backends, could be an issue. For example, for UI, comparing A/B, like two screens, it's a very clear scenario. But for example, personalized technology or something in which there's a lot of other relationships, it's not always independent. Do you have any insights on that? Or
yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I mean, trying to keep it simple, of course, to keep the big ideas one thing, but the devil's in the details when it comes to the setup of A/B testing. And I would almost kind of think of two different families of complexities that you have to think. One is development complexity, and the second one is A/B testing complexity. Development complexity basically means that you cannot A/B test it if you don't know how to build it, right? So if, for example, if you set up a variable that you want a product manager to change to experiment different versions of the app, you have to think about how your app will react in all the different situations with all the different values of the variable, right? So keeping an A/B testing system that's very complex will also, to some extent, complicate your QA process. And you need to treat the variance with the same degree of care, especially the complex ones, right, not the UI. You have to treat your variance with the same degree of care in which you would treat your baseline. With one exception, which is feature flagging. The whole idea of feature flagging is, let's just try to get this new feature to a few users and see if we mess anything up, right? The second set of complexities is A/B testing complexity itself. So it has to do with the testing. Things like, how do you make sure that when I push the variant to users and users already have the app, nothing is going to change in front of their eyes? How do I make sure that when I add a new variant, I can recollect the data in the right way, right? How do I make sure that the checkout page is going to work when I push it out, even if the user has already started the flow, right? So those have to do with the process of A/B testing itself. Other questions?
Have you ever had a problem with the App Store not being happy about the apps changing
so much?
Not really, actually, and it's we're very lucky in that extent because some companies, some mobile companies, the Facebook of the world, etc., have basically pushed the envelope in terms of A/B testing flexibility before we really entered the market. So Apple is being, so far so good. It's really a flexibility that's important. You also want to think about the fact that a lot of apps right now are hybrid, so they're dynamically pulling content from the web. So the idea of Apple being in control of 100% of the app is not realistic anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any best practice for the, in terms of the A/B testing duration or how long it may take?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This is a topic that I didn't touch on, but it's what's called test design, right? And there's a lot of different best practices around it. I had to really sum it up. The first one is always design your test in advance. There are ways to run the math, but if you've got 1,000 users that are visiting a particular page and you want to improve things by 2%, you better not run the experiment. You don't have the volume, right? And the second thing is around duration. It really depends, but the important thing is know what the seasonality of your customers is and always run the test for at least a full season. If you're a banking app, if you're a dating app and your users use you kind of every day, run it in the weekdays and the weekend because they're going to react differently. If you're a banking app and users use you at the end of the month after they get their paycheck, run it for an entire month. The story that I think of here is, what if you were Starbucks launching a new iced coffee and you only launch it during the summer and you think it performs great and then you keep it for 12 months of the year. That might not be a good idea. So you want to think about the same idea in apps, even though the cycles are a lot shorter.
If you have multiple variants to test with, so are you going to test one time both, or how is the testing?
So if you have several variants to test, yeah, okay, well that's a good question. Here's what I would say. There are two approaches that you can take. One is parallel, right? And the other one is serial, if you're testing the same topic, right? And what I'd say is this: if you're testing, the first thing you have to see is how many users do you have? Because if you don't have enough users to test 10 variants, you're never going to get an answer. So rather than getting 10 inconclusive answers, right, because of 10 variants that don't have enough users, just take one variant or two variants, do the math in advance, and get a solid answer in a little bit of time. The other advantage of testing, in sequence rather than in parallel, is that you learn from the first variant in order to make the second variant, right? You know that if you know that Let's Rock, it's a disaster, you're never going to be testing Let's Rock now, right? You're never going to be testing similar variants because you know that they're starting from low. So it really depends. In theory, is if you have unlimited users, right, you always want to test a lot of ideas in parallel. When users become a constraint, you might want to move more towards sequential testing because it becomes more efficient. Yes?
Sorry, the question is, the ones the battery or the test design topic, when we actually design the test, is that better to do the A/B testing by like small change or like big change completely? That is my question. When it comes to the product design, should we do the A/B testing with just changing the button size or button text, or we should just change layer completely?
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. The answer is that you can try both. In terms of changing button text and button labels, etc. It depends on a couple of things, right? One is how important is the part of the app where you're changing it, right? So if you're changing the wording of the last option in your settings menu, that is most likely not going to be the test that you want to run, right? And instead, if you're going into a very simple page design that has some very basic icons, those icons are going to make a big difference. In terms of testing big things versus small things, I think it's useful sometimes to test big things, right? The important thing that I see, especially in larger companies and larger corporations, is to never get stuck in what I call confirmation testing. Confirmation testing is the practice of taking a huge project that you're going to do anyway, and building a hugely complicated test where if the answer is it works, everybody's life continues, and if the answer is it doesn't work, everybody's in trouble. It's not the right way of thinking about testing. If you really want to do that, think about the cost, think about the benefits. Sometimes design choices need to be made anyway, and think about testing metrics that will suggest how you can improve the program, right? Rather than just metrics that tell you if it works or doesn't work. Because you know you're going to do it anyway. It's part of your quarterly strategy, right? So that's a good way to think about it and not get stuck in confirmation testing, which just doesn't create any value.
And the second question would be, so real-time testing that you mentioned that you guys actually developing that infrastructure right now. Could you actually share with us the time schedule?
It's out there. It's being developed.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's out there. It's being developed for a while. Yeah. It's a technology that allows you to change. It's limited to the UI component, the native UI component of your apps, right? There's no time soon when you will be able to add a feature, right? That's not out there yet. You cannot add a feature without resubmitting the app, right? But the idea is being able to change every component of the UI, call to action, icons, layout, style. Those are the things that you can modify entirely in real time.
Okay, so like technically everything we can actually change it on the real time right now. Because
There are some limitations, but the broad topic is every part of the UI, or the native UI. So the part that's kind of, the UI labels, the views, the tables, etc. Any other questions?
All right, thanks, Robbie.
Thank you very much.